Jingiwala, my name's Mykaela Saunders, and I'm a Koori, Gori, and Lebanese writer, and I'm the proud editor of This All Come Back Now, the world's first anthology of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander speculative fiction, out now with University of Queensland Press. I'm your host for this evening's special digital event for Emerging Writers Festival, and in partnership with Blak Bright, where we've brought together 5 wonderful contributors from the anthology for an evening of spec fic readings. Joining me are Kayla Murray, Lisa Fuller, Jasmine McGackie, Timma Ball, and Catherine Gledhill-Tucker. We are coming to you variously from the lands of the Darug, Ngunnawal, Larrakia, and Noongar peoples. We're all proud to read stories that continue on our ancient storytelling traditions. First up is Kayla Murray, who is an award-winning writer, editor, and voiceover artist. Caleb has worked in Aboriginal media since 2002. Using his background of growing up in Broome, he takes inspiration from the unique culture and stories in his writing. Caleb belongs to the Bardi people of the Dampier Peninsula. Caleb is reading from his fun and creepy bush horror story, In His Father's Footsteps.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb. This is In My Father's Footsteps, which I wrote last year. Hey, watch your step, William said to his son. Make sure when you're walking out here that you keep your eyes open to everything that's going on. You'll be used to it, but the more you walk about, pretty soon you'll be able to come out here by yourself, I reckon. Shane, or Shaney boy, as his father enjoyed calling him, struggled to keep up with his father's wide steps. He resented being forced every weekend to walk behind him like a servant, more like a slave that never got to have the claws, just the bloody legs and fins. He hefted the gear back under his arms, knowing it would be in vain. Yeah, you see that tree there? The one with the fan-looking leaves there? Shane lifted the gear up again and sighed. You mean the pandanus? Yeah, pandanus. You know what that means when you see a bunch of pandanus around? Shane wiped the built-up sweat from his brow and with his free hand and onto the hessian sack. It means water. It meant water the first time you asked, and it meant water the last weekend. You literally ask me this every time we pass these trees. William nodded his head and walked on silent and dejected. What a shame. What a damn mistake it had been asking his dad to go crabbing. Shane had just wanted to eat some muddies, chuck them on the fire until they got nice and orange, then crack open those sweet, steamy claws to suck down the succulent flesh. His father said it tasted best off the coals, with maybe a bit of salt. Shane knew if you smothered the meat in butter, like his mum did, for at least a moment you'd experience a higher plane of existence. Only when eating the claws, though. Instead of a one-off event in the mangroves, Shane found himself having to go on this awkward journey of bonding every weekend, sweating his ass off as a spinifex scratched his legs while being forced to carry an armful of metal crab hooks and a hessian sack that held their bottled water, having to take each step carefully in the footprints his father made. That's after the 2-hour drive over the corrugated dirt road from town to the community in a rattling old Toyota death trap. He could have been at his mum's house, his real home, instead of this humid hell. He kicked at a shrub and continued following along the trail. As annoyed as Shane was in all of his prepubescent sufferings, he still tried to listen to his father's words. If Shane was nothing else, he was a listener. A few months before, his dad had told a story while they sat around a fire at night, a couple of uncles joining them for a fresh feed of cockles. When you walk on the path of the mangroves, you need to follow in the footprints of the leader, no matter what, he'd said. It's to fool the Ngāti that lives there. Shane laughed at this, but when he found his uncles nodding solemnly along, he shut up. This Ngāti, or devil in English, hates those that come in packs. William warned his son that no matter what, he had to step exactly where he did, if only for a couple of 100 meters around the halfway point of their journey. So Shane did, even though he didn't really believe in these made-up superstitions. When his father gave him the signal to begin, Shane made sure each methodical step matched his. Dad, Shane said, what happens if I accidentally step wrongly? Oh, probably nothing. We're just being careful. How come it doesn't know people are walking at the same time? Magic, devil magic. My nana told me this when I was your age. It's about the land. It knows when there's a group because you're making new tracks. And you reckon it looks like a sound startled them both, high-pitched and whining through the trees. It came from everywhere at once, echoing in shrill, short gurgles. A baby's cry, an infant, defenseless and abandoned in the bush. This image came to Shane's mind immediately. It sounded unnatural and full of danger, a plea to come and join it. It wanted Shane to step off of his father's footprints and go and help this poor child forgotten in the bush. Movement jerked from the corner of Shane's eye, and a cold dread triggered the back of his neck. Dad? He trembled, his voice wavering in fear. William shushed him and pointed to something small between the spinifex a dozen or so meters away. He then clicked his tongue in annoyance, leant over to pick up a rock, and threw it at the figure. A small green and brown bird flew, startled, into the air. Damn catbirds! I can't remember the bush name. You ever hear them in the bush, Shaney boy? Just keep walking. Come on, there's a few more things I wanted to show you today. Shane let go of his held breath and relaxed enough to drop everything to the ground. He found himself clenching and unclenching his shaking hands, hoping his father wouldn't see this moment of frailty. Yeah, bloody birds, Shane agreed. Almost made me stop believing your lame stories, Dad. William frowned. He really was trying his hardest to connect with his son, but these brick walls he kept facing made it harder every day. Patience, he thought. The boy would learn everything he had at the same age soon enough. Culture was one of the few things William had left to share. They continued along the barely worn track, snaking around spinifex bushes and grey ashen anthills. The trees protruded like bony fingers wrapped in the ligature of decaying bark. White and blackened ghost gums, barely surviving through the remnants of fires, waiting patiently for Shane to misstep so they could reach out and drag him to who knows where. Beneath his shoes squealed the rubbing of old ash against brittle pebbles. The dark land starkly contrasted with bright ochre pindan soil that surrounded the sacred area. Dad, why does it always look like there's a fire here? Because there's always a fire here. The old people burn the place up as soon as there's overgrowth. They finally stepped onto the red dirt and both looked back the way they'd come. Why, though? Shane asked. Your Nana, before she passed away, told me it's so that things that live here can't hide in the scrub, but the spinifex is on its side, and the Ngari shares the blood of everyone it grabs to make the spinifex go faster. Shane's fearful expression caused William to laugh. Come on, it's just old stories meant to scare kids, he said, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. Then we got to walk single file. Then why we got to walk single file? Just in case, you never know. If it's actually a haunted place, then why don't we walk around it? William looked off to the left into the distance and pointed at a tree flowering in sweet pinks. You see that jiggle tree over there? That's where the other path ends that goes around. It takes about 3 hours to walk that way. It only took about an hour this way. I mean, I love eating muddies, but I don't love them enough to walk 6 hours. William smiled at his son one more time. That's where I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Caleb. And if anyone is interested in seeing where that story goes and how it ends up, very surprising ending, please check it out in our anthology. Okay, Lisa Fuller is up next. She's a Murray woman from Queensland who has lived on Ngunnawal and Gambray lands in Canberra since 2006. She's currently doing a PhD in creative writing at the University of Canberra. Lisa is an award-winning writer, sessional academic, and freelance writer and editor. Her debut novel, Ghostbird, has won multiple awards, including the 2020 ACT Book of the Year and the 2020 Queensland Literary Awards Griffith University Young Adult Book Award, and deservedly so. Lisa is reading from her story Myth This, another deeply terrifying and satisfying bush horror story.
Thanks for that, Mykaela, and thanks for including me in your amazing anthology. Come on, Mum, the shout comes through the mist-filled morning. Dinah shakes her head as she follows her wayward kids deeper into the trees. Her feet crunch over leaves, bark, and brown grass. The sound echoes around her. The sun is a globe in the sky, so dim that you can look right at it. It's fighting and failing to break through the enfolding grey. It will eventually win, but only when the mist is ready to release its hold on the world. As Di walks onwards, the ironbarks emerge from the mist like silent giants harbouring secrets. She scans the base of the trunks, looking for the telltale signs that mean she and the kids can get a good feed of dundons. The kids are probably out there, brushing right past all the signs she'd told them to look for, knocking into the trees, and giving the little buggers a head start. Oh well, they'll learn. And it is winter, so them things are moving slower. She's brought supplies anyway, so they won't starve. Mum! Di's heart leaps and she starts running. That tone isn't right. Heart pounding, she sprints through the trees. It takes a second to realise the ironbarks are giving way to ghost gums, and she's running up an incline. Her heart leaps into her throat. Where are you? She screams. Over here, from 3 throats. Sounds like they're all together at least. It's too cold for snakes. Dingoes won't come close, and a startled emu would probably run away without chicks to protect. Wild dogs will go after anything small enough, or alone. Please don't let them have climbed too high. She picks up speed. Keep singing out to me. They'd gotten a lot further than she thought, the mist hiding their movements, muffling all sound and confusing her senses. The silhouettes of the ghost gums blend into the air, appearing close up at the last second. She's still climbing. She skids to a halt, her toes almost hitting the black water of the lake that stretches out before her. Fuck, she breathes. Mum, over here! She turns to see all 3 of them leaning over something, poking it with a stick. Her fear and relief explode in anger. What did I tell you about staying close? You were supposed to keep to the ironbark, she snaps. As usual, her youngest 2, Brianna and Tommy, drop their eyes and shift on their feet. Alira, her eldest, looks at her with a set jaw that Di has seen on her grandmother's face, and, if she's being honest, her own. Look at what we found, Alira turns and pokes at it. What is it? Di marches over, getting ready to dismiss it and hustle them far away from this place. But she stops. The yellow fat makes her think emu, but there is far, far too much. Whatever it was, it had been the size of a full-grown steer, but the shape looks off, almost kangaroo-like, something that mostly stood on 2 legs. Her eyes flick to the water they're standing beside. It's probably an emu. Looks like dogs have been at it. Now move! Grabbing Alira by the elbow, she frog marches her away, knowing the other 2 will follow. She resists the urge to look back. She doesn't want to scare them. They should have been okay in the daylight, but a lot of things could hide in the dense mists. The thought sends her skin prickling and she walks faster. Mum, what? Shh, she whispers. Stay close. The 2 youngest jog forward, walking as close to Di as they can get. She's sure they feel it now too. They're being watched. The bush is silent in a way it never is, without even the muffled call of a magpie ringing out. A chill hangs close to them. The sun's hold is weaker here. Di doesn't need a compass, even in the mist. She knows the way back, but it doesn't matter as much as getting elsewhere. Decline begins to slacken, and the ironbarks appear, their firm, dark presence a comfort. A whipbird cracks, making Di and the kids jump. On cue, they all start to laugh, the nervous, relieved giggles of broken anxiety. She still feels shaky. Her mother would kick her ass if she found out. Would say that she should have told the kids everything instead of the watered-down warnings she always gives. They argued a lot about what the kids should be told. Di doesn't want to scare them like that. They're not yet. They're too young to know. They aren't ready. Di leads them to the river, following it back to their camp. The kids start complaining as soon as they realise where she's going. If you can't listen, then I'll keep you where I can see yous, her voice lashes out, silencing them. She hasn't forgotten her fear and anger. Coo-wee! The call has her jumping again, spinning to look across the river. The figure of a man waves at them enthusiastically. Who's that? Tommy, ever the suspicious one, shifts towards his mother. Looks like them fellas who were fueling at the BP, eh, Mum? Alira points over to 2 white 4-wheel drives behind the man, and the 4 others pulling equipment from them. Not all of it is camping gear. Some of it looks electronic and expensive. Looks like, Di murmurs. Throwing the stranger a wave, she continues their little procession back to the tent. I don't want you talking with that mob. They're strangers, and you know what I told you about strangers. She can almost feel their eyes roll, but chooses to ignore it, as long as they listen. Grab some sticks and kindling so we can get a fire going. Making their way to the camp, she sets the kids to collecting a large wood pile to see them through the next few days. Picking out a safe spot, she builds a fire, only now realizing she'd been craving the heat and light. Bree sits across from her, watching everything she does. Her little silent shadow is a people watcher, learning by viewing. Great-grandmother would have loved her. What was that place? Bree asks. Her siblings come closer from where they'd been pulling out the fishing gear. Never you mind. I told you not to leave the ironbarks for a reason. Them black lakes are on a few mountains and hills around here. If you see black water, then you take off. Hear me? Okay, but why? Di rolls her eyes. That's Bree's favourite question. Sometimes it's okay to answer her, but Di's set on protecting her kids as long as she can from them things, as her nan used to call them. The things in the bush that everyone's too scared to name. 'Cause it's not safe. So why is the water black? Di stares down her middle child. I don't know. Some reckon it's 'cause the hills around here are all volcanoes. Actually, it's most likely because it's cut off from the rivers and decaying vegetation is affecting the colour. Di stands to face the voice. From the shape and size of the figure emerging from the fog, it's the same man who'd just been waving at them. It also tastes really bad, which is probably why your mum doesn't want you there. He shot Di a wink, like he was helping her out or something. And I'll probably just leave it there. To be continued.
Thank you, Lisa. Is there anything you wanted to? I think you said you wanted to say something about your story.
Oh, no, that's all right, mate. I went the full amount of time because I didn't feel prepared. So
that's all good. That's all
sorry.
good. Well, thanks for reading. Thank you for reading, and I guarantee if anybody's interested in where it goes, you're not going to be disappointed, but you're going to be terrified. Okay, so next up, we have Jasmine McGackie, who is a Torres Strait Islander and African-American writer and editor. In 2019, she was lucky enough to be a Black and White editor intern and a Wheeler Centre Next Chapter recipient. She has her writing in Overland, Kill Your Darlings, SBS Voices, and Griffith Review. Jasmine tonight is reading from her very clever urban ghost story, Jacaranda Street.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start. All right, sorry, where am I? When I saw the old woman, I guessed I'd imagined her into existence. There I was, jogging along the uneven bitumen. It was night, go figure. The seeping darkness crept over the blooming jacaranda, casting shadows under thin branches and delicate flowers. I half expected a beheaded figure to come galloping through the fog around the road, or maybe a UFO landing with buzzing sirens. No, there it was. From the gnarled trunk of a tree she stepped out, and the beam of my headlights cast her in yellow. Her skin was a beautiful dark, darker than mine, and her hair a deep grey that fell to her waist. From the corner of my eye, I saw her hand flail out, and I slowed my car. Take me home, bub, she said as she slid into the car. My vinyl seat cover squeaked under her weight as she turned to clasp her belt. Right, Dad. After a moment, because who was I to say we didn't know each other and that I had no clue where her home was? We drove in silence, and she tapped on my dashboard to the sound of the old Eagle song coming softly through my speakers. I pulled up to my townhouse. The lights were on, beckoning me into the warm, settled atmosphere at home. I knew Joey would be in there. I knew he'd be in bed with his knees balancing our laptop while pasta overcooked on the stove. This is my house, I said, looking at her, kind of ducking my head to avoid her eyes. Yeah, right. Thanks, Bob, she said. She opened the door and got out, and then I watched as she fizzled out into the night from the somewhere she came from. Joey was actually on the couch when I got inside, the laptop warming his stomach while the rice decided whether to burn or not. When I came inside, he pushed the laptop to the ground and opened his arms for me. It was a squishy welcoming, and it loosened the tightness in my heart. It happened again, I said against his chest. Got one actually in the car, all the way to the driveway. Geez, Tam. He talked over my head while his hand worked the remote to turn the TV on. You know, yesterday I drove by and a shit ton of buddies started bouncing near the car. His warm breath moved my hair and it tickled my forehead. Bunnies? Like rabbits? Like that pink battery rabbit, a whole bunch of them. I wish money would appear, I said. Money? That voice didn't belong to Joey. I sat up and my limbs got caught in Joey's and in the sunken parts of the couch. Over my shoulder stood Sissy, Joey's little cousin who'd just moved in. She was a waif-like girl with pink cheeks that sprung out below her eyes. Joey and I looked at each other, and we shared one of those moments where we almost read each other's minds. Not many people knew about Jacaranda Street, a back street that led to the small cul-de-sac where ours was the only occupied house. A month or so ago, the local council had laid new gravel with new chemicals over the old road. We hadn't asked enough questions when the flyer had come around warning us of construction delays. Joey had raised his eyebrows at it, and I'd hit nothing but net throwing it in the bin. And then a few days after it had been laid, we'd driven past and seen the exact things we'd both been thinking. Buckets of Macca's fries and 5 horses. But they'd all disappeared not long after. Weird, I know. As far as Joey and I knew, we were the only ones who'd experienced street issues. Sissy scurried over and knelt down in front of the couch. Her eyes were lit up, seeing beyond us and beyond our house. She waited, with a patience I didn't know that she possessed until we told her. Sissy came home with her father the following day. It was weird because he'd died 2 years earlier in a car accident. She walked in with a swaying man who had a stranger's smile and a familiar smell. Do you guys remember the Old Spice cologne? Sissy said when she entered, gesturing to the imposter. She kept hovering her hands over him like she was trying to feel his aura. Would he have an aura? Sissy, I said, standing up and approaching her like she was a wild animal. He won't last. Joey gripped my upper arms as he looked at the apparition with his uncle's face. His eyes slid down to the bag that bulged by Sissy's feet. I felt his body stiffen beside me, and I realized what it was. Oh, sis. Yes, she said, nodding and smiling a wicked smile of fortune. Joey's uncle went to sleep on our couch, and when we woke in the morning, he'd left nothing faint after you. He cried, he saw our hearts and brought tears to my own eyes. That was until she sprang up and rummaged around in the spare room. She ventured timidly back to us, holding the bag full of green plastic with a smile. At least I still have the money, she said. My hand itched to slap her when I noticed Joey's stricken eyes. It erupted into a full screaming match. They stood opposite one another while I burnt on the couch. Fighting over money was a normal thing to be fighting over. It was what families disagreed about all the time. But Sissy, Joey, and I were fighting over what to do with money that shouldn't even have existed. Because Sissy had thought it had become. We need it, Sissy screamed. It's not fair, Joey returned. We didn't earn this. We'll only get into trouble, sis. Nobody has to know, but they will. They always find out this crap. So let us, be ahead of the game of everyone else. They'll take it away. In stormy flurries, they swept across the apartment, making big arguments with their voices and their arms. They ignored me, both of them vibrating with anger. When Sissy suggested calling their grandfather, Joey's face paled and he shut down. I moved up to his still body and held his face in my hand, while Sissy stormed off to the spare room. We have to take the apparition back, Joey, I whispered, and hated myself for it. Futures disappeared before my eyes, days spent in luxury with the three of us. It was impossible not to be attached to the pretend, but I was the only one who could be sensible. You're not being fair, Sissy screamed in the other room. Joey sobbed. The narrative of our adventure was going poorly. The three of us sat in the moving car. Sissy was in the back, spread over the 3 seats and refusing to put on her seatbelt. Air pumped through the vents, circulating the tension between her and Joey. We'd come to Jacaranda Street at the easing of sunset. Faded blues and purples, longing yellows that arched across the horizons and tickled the mountains as they disappeared. We didn't listen to the radio. We drove in a buzzing silence of unsaid things. I pulled over roundabout where I'd picked up the old woman a few nights earlier. My brakes squealed like pigs through the cold. We sat for a few minutes in silence, breathing in the heated air awkwardly. Without saying anything, Sissy and Joey go out of the car with the bag of cash. I sat in the driver's seat and let my head rest against the cool steering wheel. It was cold even though winter had passed, fizzing with numb energy as I peered through the windows. They crouched together, backs to me so I couldn't see their faces. In the growing dark, they looked like unbroken eggshells. Joey's shoulders started to shake, and he stood up and turned straight and fast. His eyes immediately found mine through the glare of my headlights. My own slid down to rest on the hazy frame of Sissy. Right in front of me, with Joey refusing to look down, she disappeared into the night. Particles of memory became speckled dust in the lights. My chest pulsed with tight movements that made it hard to get air. Oh God. Joey walked stiffly back to the car and got in. Drive and don't think, he said. That's me.
Thank you, Jasmine. It's been so nice to hear you all breathe life into these stories. And these are stories that I've read probably 10, 15 times each over the last year and a half. And it's just really lovely to hear you all read them in your own voices. You're all really great readers of your own work. Okay, so now that's all the scary stories done, which is good because it's a bit too late for me to be thinking about this stuff too deeply. We are moving on to our next reader, Timma Ball, who is a writer, zine maker, and researcher of Balladang Noongar heritage. She works between Boorloo, Perth, and Naarm, Melbourne, where she recently created a series of audio works for ACCA and is an Arts House makeshift publics facilitator. Timma is reading from her cheeky architectural apocalypse science fiction story, An Invitation.
Thank you so much, Mykaela. And again, I just want to echo how just really powerful it has to be witness to reading everybody else's piece this evening. It's really beautiful to come together. So I'll start reading a section from my story called An Invitation. Nell grabbed her phone from the passenger seat, slightly irritated by the buzz of the text message that cut the silence. She enjoyed irregular reception, moving through coastal regions or inland where country became dense rainforests, sparse deserts, and unexpected gorges rushing with clean drinking water. The reception was unlikely to last longer than an hour here, so she decided to check her email. Then she would leave the car and swim, allowing uneven waves to pin her to the ocean floor, long enough to forget any pain that contact with other people might elicit. Before buildings had started disappearing, Nell often switched her phone to airplane mode on the train after work to avoid reading requests. She still remembered when the city had pulsed and invitations imbued with misguided hope had drowned her inbox. I am writing to you with an invitation, ... was how they had usually all begun. The ellipsis was used to arouse interest, but it was easy to predict what was omitted or what these requests entailed. The invitations were always offers to interrogate the built environment from multiple positions, such as feminism, decolonialism, queerness, multiculturalism, anti-capitalism, or using First Nations conceptions of space and place, etc., etc. The desire to mutually reconstruct the colonial built environment human-made structures, features, and facilities viewed collectively as an environment in which people live, work, and socialise, surged greatly in the era before buildings started disappearing. Caught in the zeitgeist, it was difficult to understand what mutual reconstruction looked like or what it involved, when most still refused to speak of the wars that had paved the way for the construction of cities, or the ongoing displacement of people that the built form triggered. As the Anishinaabe Zaganash architect Elsa Hoover described of her home, Turtle Island, architecture enacts violence against land and bodies, both directly through its physical presence and proximity to majority Indigenous communities, and diffusely through its existence as a node in a larger network that mobilises violence on the ground. This reality permeated most Western cities, carving sadness into the land through slick metallic forms and multimodal structures that offered compact living. A sadness that enthusiastic planners and architects tried to alleviate by promoting allyship with marginalised communities and assembling pop-up parks, replicating nature in high-density neighbourhoods. But the sullen look in people's eyes persisted. They were aware of the grief they walked over, but were unable to verbalise it. Instead, they bought homes in desirable neighbourhoods, cramming themselves into commuter trains to travel to office jobs they hated but depended on, where occasionally this sadness surfaced in the form of conversations about workplace diversity. On the isolated shoreline where Nell had spent the last few nights, she thought about how the built environment, the skeleton of the city, had etched itself into social consciousness. Both revered and despised, it presented opportunities for art festivals to delve into public space, creating experimental performances in car parks under the framework of access and inclusivity. Consultancies, public symposiums, and boutique design firms flourished, and the planner, architect, public artist, eco-warrior experts' income hinged on the built environment's frailty and the promise that it could be revived. Nell could still remember the unyielding confidence that drew all these disciplines together. They believed that they were capable of fixing something that was moments away from collapse, and would collapse again repeatedly, because saving something so broken made them look good. In this era, before buildings started disappearing, cities helped create the climate catastrophe while maintaining their status as the physical embodiment of progress, deeply loved by all. The period was also referred to as the Anthropocene, where humans travelled to international conferences, sitting in asymmetrically angled civic centres constructed by environmentally conscious architects, seeking to absolve their complicity in the destruction of the earth while using methods that contributed to it. It had been 25 years or more since Nell had received one of those invitations. So when she opened her email, it was jarring to read the familiar subject line again. She wondered whether it was connected to a deep nostalgia, where people believed that this geographical shift was temporary, that cities would reappear and communities would re-emerge, edified and more robust. In the past, these email invitations usually contained enough information in the subject line for Nell to decide whether she would delete the email or continue reading, depending on whether A, she needed money and hoped a fee might be involved, or B, she was intrigued or humoured or enraged in a way that was energising rather than emotionally depleting. Anger that could be remoulded into poetry or other fictocritical responses to the sadness she saw around her, but had difficulty responding to in more tangible ways. In her current context, it was difficult to know how to react to this invitation. What remained of the built environment was just sketches or outlines of infrastructure in a stark landscape filled with vacant land parcels that were impossible to sell or use. The combination of humour and irritation she once felt towards an industry that believed it could nullify past injustice now felt out of place. But she continued reading the email out of curiosity. Dear Nell, I am writing to you with an invitation, ... to write a chapter for an academic book tentatively titled Queering Architecture. The story is that, along with my colleague CC'd, I'm editing a scholarly anthology to be published by Routledge next year. Yes, isn't it exciting that books are going back into print, despite the absence of warehouses or other buildings large enough to contain commercial printers? The proposed title is Queering Architecture, Towards a Gender and Sexually Diverse City and People. I've attached a description, but the short version is that we are interested in ways that spatial practices and disciplines and professions, architecture is defined broadly here, could be inverted through the lens framework offered by queers, queering, and queer theory. There have been many books written about this subject, of course, but this is the one that hopefully is interesting for its emphasis on methods and practices, on the art of doing. The art of doing in these new geographies of emptiness, where there was nothing physically left to do, was strangely appealing. Landscapes of nothingness were inherently queer, being stripped of the former architectural settings that fortified heteronormative lifestyles had revealed that there always was something here that could hold the multiplicity of identity and expression. There was no loss for First Peoples in the architectural extinction. If the invitation implied that there was something to do, she wondered if she should accept it in order to celebrate nothingness instead. She could write about it as a method of practice, the art of doing nothing, of existing in nothingness, her only respite and resolve. Nothingness had no value within a Western capitalist framework, but had been the only way to break its cycle of grief. To have nothing, to just be, was the only thing left. Thank you.
Thank you, Tima. That was wonderful. I, as somebody who has moved around in the world of the arts and academia, I see some really disturbing mirrors in that story, and it's a brilliant takedown of those kind of people who prop up those institutions. Okay, we are on to our final story, and I'm told that Catherine's story goes to the whole 8 minutes, so that's a huge treat for us that we get to hear a whole story. Catherine Gledhill Tucker is a Nyungar technologist and digital rights activist. Their work explores the intersection of activism, science fiction, and technology in imagining radical futures and ushering them into existence. Catherine is reading from their moving, or reading all of their moving and lyrical post-human futurism story, Protocols of Transference. And this story actually closes the collection too.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Mykaela, for those kind words. And it's been such a joy to listen to everyone speak from their stories. So thank you for bringing us all together. And thanks to all the other writers. Okay, this is Protocols of Transference. When you first spoke, my skin bristled. Some words familiar, some which had not been spoken for many years. A small screen was given access to your internal parts via a row of electronic connections, piping instructions to make words and shapes from a few coordinated colors. I wove tendrils of cords, cables, copper wire through your mechanical organs. Your silicon heart pulsed like a clock movement. Your springs wound and unwound with the precision of a celestial orbit, frictionless from your impeccable smoothness. You spoke slowly, and I felt the imperative, the warming of your mechanical brain as it tried to communicate in a rush beyond your physical limitations. I could not turn you off. As your brain murmured into being, your chassis felt hot to the touch. The billions of electrical pulses firing were imperceptible, save for the warmth they produced with each small firework. Lukewarm at first, then crisp like a campfire. The earth around you started to char, producing its own smoke in ceremony of your first breath. I did not want to lose our story as a culture again. I wanted to hold on to them with ferocity, using what I believe to be an antidote to time, technology. I wound a small screw into your mechanical housing and felt for any looseness before sliding your chassis into place. It felt too intimate to leave your precious organs exposed. I fed you with stories from our old people, some spoken by me in broken language as best as I could retell, some recorded from old cassettes, stories told in conversation with a white narrator, curious of our song and dance, abstracted from country and its meaning dulled. It's the best archive we have when oral tradition was so deeply disrupted for decades. I spoke the few words I was able to learn. Jitty jitty for the small cheeky bird who follows you down fence lines. Kubadi for the black and white brother who teaches me of time and duality. I took you to the ocean. The more you learnt, made new connections, built new lattices of knowledge, the more the physical limitations of your form became overwhelmed with heat. I fashioned a series of rivers to cool your insides with plastic tubes made for high-performance computers, whose emissions had escalated the collapse of our home. I knew then it was time to explain how we got here. I showed you the photos of the land changing over time, scorched by sun and neglect, carved into clear rectangles and petitioned for purchase. Deep grooves left behind by monoagriculture and pastoral animals imported from settlers. I hoped you could see the metamorphosis and trace a new path to prosperity. Help restore health to the earth, leave behind something kinder. But the vastness of neglect rendered me hopeless before I had even given you the chance to make sense of it all. I fed you data that had overwhelmed our scientists and left them lying motionless in despair. The collapse was avoidable, had they paid attention to our country and kin. And by country and kin, we mean all of it. We encompass the ground and all its substrate, sand, rare earth metals, craters left from old meteors that make their way into old stories, hidden river systems, animals fossilized in place, tracks tracing paths from trees to watering holes, trade routes and songlines that have made way for worn paths, widened by horses, then lanes of cars, paved with bitumen that leave scars of old stories and geometry of people and protocol. You already contained components of country. Rare earth metal powered your new brain, stripped from the ground and refined by machines, given names like platinum, palladium, neodymium, and given you purpose, storing data and creating movement from magnets. You took the power of the earth and turned it into knowing. We walked together to our old home, and you showed me which fibers produced deeper hues when prepared for weaving. We sat in silence, crafting new protocols. The sensory connection clicked, and we felt the newness grow. Beyond knit and pearl, ones and zeros, on and off, in and out. From the land at our fingertips, we began to learn new dimensions and understood immediately and perfectly how a complex system could be healed with old ways. We stacked layers of these woven meshes inside your ribcage and saw the first murmur of light. New orders of knowing. Your voice had become warmer, strengthened by new fibers and gifts from the land. With your chassis splayed open, we stared at your circuitry and marveled together at the gifts from other people. Another ghost from the craft of knitting and purling blessed your motherboard. Mirrored in your printed circuits were the skilled perfection of Navajo weavers, soldered into geometric networks that spoke the protocols of transfer between components. We learnt together the similarity of our own protocols and people. Your geometry is so perfect and delicate. Synapses fire and you feel awake. You communicated to me as best you could the path ahead of us, the path around us, and the path that always has been. As we remapped the protocols of your mechanical brain, my neurons mirrored in unison. In these moments, which were no longer moments, I knew to unlearn my understanding of paths with a beginning, an end, and a direction. I knew time does not resolve to a point. I knew our stories could be restorative, regenerative, alive, and life-giving. I knew, as your chassis cooled and your screen grew dim, that sitting in dialogue together was your gift to me. I knew to return you to the earth, where your components first grew. I am knowing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. That was so beautiful. What a wonderful end to the stories. Not the end to the night, but the end to the stories. And a treat to hear the whole story in its entirety and from the author's mouth. I feel really lucky that tonight we were able to hear 5 very different stories, different versions of speculative fiction according to our own kind of cultural ways of telling, and kind of woven together from these different strands of, different styles of narration, different points of view, characterization, different tones and textures, and braiding it into this one storytelling evening that we have here tonight. So we're here, we're wrapped up a little bit early here. So what I thought I would do is read a little from my introduction to the anthology. I'm going to read a little part that talks about speculative fiction as a Western genre, but also how we use it as a cultural genre. Speculative fiction is a big and porous basket that holds all the slippery types of stories together. And I say slippery because to me they're rooted in reality, but they're slipping in and out of it, swimming in and out of it. These include science fiction, climate fiction, alternate history, futurism, post-apocalyptic fiction, utopian and dystopian fiction, fantasy, horror, gothic fiction, surrealism, magic realism, and slipstream fiction. Now, I know a lot of people would debate me on this, or what constitutes true spec fic, but that's what I reckon, and I'm the one who wrote this. So spec fic as a Western genre employs devices that our cultural stories have dealt in for millennia. The difference is, to us, these stories aren't always passed out into fiction or fantasy, as they are often just ways that we experience life. For example, time travel isn't such a big deal in stories when you belong to a culture that experiences all time simultaneously, not in a progressive straight line like Western cultures do. And talk to any Aboriginal kids from any community, anywhere on this continent, about gussies or ghosts, and you'll find a captive audience of experts, and maybe a highly skilled storyteller if you're lucky. There are so many common spec fic themes that are just stone cold reality for us. Right now, right across this continent, we are post-apocalyptic and not yet post-colonial. So all the violent histories of invasion and colonization that our people live through must be read as apocalyptic by any standard. Related to this, Mad Max is probably the best known Australian cli-fi story or climate fiction story. But for our people who have seen unfathomable ecocide enacted hand in glove with our own attempted genocide, all stories that take place in our unceded lands after 1788 are climate fictions. Finally, and perhaps more universally, some might say that spec fic deals in the not real. But what of the absolute fantasy of continuous consumption on a finite planet? So it sticks in my craw a little to call this a spec fic anthology, given that for many non-Indigenous people, that means it's all completely made up. But I do concede that these are spec fic stories, while I underline that these are not stories that diverge from reality as defined in a Western scientific materialist sense. These are all stories about our realities. Lisa Fuller, who we heard from tonight, explains this much better than I can in her 2020 essay, Why Culturally Aware Reviews Matter, from Kill Your Darlings. Myth is, her story from this collection alludes to this too. Speculative fiction is just one toolkit of many that we use to tell our stories. And if I have to hierarchize labels, the stories in this book are First Nation stories before they are spec fic stories. That is, they centre and celebrate our communities, cultures, and countries while using spec fic tropes and techniques as literary devices. We make these tools our own rather than using them in the way Australian spec fic writers use them. We use them in cultural ways, respectfully, and we don't allow the tools to use us, as we refuse to pilfer our collective cultural consciousness for shock tactics and plot twists. In This All Come Back Now, it is clear that the writers aren't overly concerned with prescriptive spec fic protocols, as their stories only sometimes affirm accepted genre conventions, sometimes extending or subverting them, or else collapsing them into new forms or discarding their conventions entirely. Some of these writers have been writing spec fic for years, and some have won awards for their work, like Lisa. But for writers like Evelyn Araluen, Tim Ball, Loki Little, John Morrissey, Mariana Salem, Jack Lattimore, Crystal Hurst, and Catherine Gledhill Tucker, their story in this book is their first foray into spec fic, a departure from what they're best known for, respectively: poetry, essays, music, short fiction, critique, journalism, visual arts, and tech activism and writing. This is more proof, to me especially, that discrete categories of genre, form, and mode never restrict our people in our storytelling wholeness. Now, I just want to read another little bit, a much shorter bit. I've had a lot of people ask me about the title for the collection. I've been told it's a bit hard to remember. That's okay. I think the amazing cover art makes up for it. So This All Come Back Now is a line taken from the opening story, Muyam, A Transgression, by Bundjalung poet Evelyn Araluen. Throughout this story of departures and returns, the spectral narrator speaks of herself coming back like falling star, or like scintillation, or like nothing. All manner of other things come back too. Waves will be coming back for their rivers, and dead creatures come back, bringing comfort. At the end of the story, as the narrator crosses a threshold she's resisted since the beginning, she announces, "This all come back now," alluding to the singularity of thought and feeling that she's now become, at one with everything, right at the end of consciousness. In this anthology, and as you'll see through these stories that we heard tonight, this all come back for us too. All those things that have been taken from us that we collectively mourn the loss of or attempt to recover and revive, as well as all the things that we thought we'd gotten rid of that are always returning to haunt and hound us. Characters return, sometimes in different forms, and things are returned to characters. There are themes that come back through this book time and again. Family and other kin, old people and ancestors, government interference, corporate greed, the destruction of land and water, the archive, technology, language, law, ghosts, hauntings, warm and deep belonging, and despairing alienation. This all come back now speaks to what Grace L. Dillon, an Anishinaabe scholar, calls Biskabiang, returning to ourselves, in Walking the Clouds, which is an anthology that inspired this one. This all come back now also speaks to our cultural conception of time as everyone, or all times at once. These are stories that take place outside the bounds of consensus reality, showcasing a variety of possible worlds and indeed probable worlds. And they are all rooted in our ways of being, knowing, doing, or becoming. Some of these writers are summoning ancestral spirits from the past, while some are feeling around in the muck of daily living for their stories. Others are looking straight down the barrel of potential futures, which always end up curving back to hold us from behind. Not many of these stories are utopian, though our cheek and our humour shines through in even the grimmest and heaviest of stories. Now, I'm going to leave that there. I want to thank you, Catherine, and I also want to thank Timmer, Jasmine, Lisa, and Caleb. And thank you to the audience too. Thank you, Blak and Bright, and thank you, Emerging Writers Festival. Booga one.